Okay, so welcome everybody to this talk on global politics. This is a few days after the Vesak full moon, the solar festival with the sun in Taurus and the moon in Scorpio, which, as you know, brings very high spiritual energies. And of course, the high spiritual energies percolate through and disseminate out into the world. The focus is really about politics, but it's also quite economical. There's very little of it that's of a spiritual nature. And I suppose the best thing I can say about this is that I have an interest, but not much expertise in matters to do with politics or money, but I have a strong interest in it. And I'd like to talk about it as I see it, both from the mundane and also from the esoteric astrology's perspective, as I look at a few of the charts. So I'll be looking at the Taurus stellium that's dominating this week and how that, in my mind, is connected to the battle that's going on for global trade and control. And particularly I'm focusing upon the United States and China and the various areas where their expansion is occurring and this attempt for sort of global control. We'll stop for a bit of a discussion, and then towards the end, we'll continue on and look a little bit at what's going on with the Middle East, and particularly with Trump's visit to the Middle East. So I have here the chart. I just wanted to show you. Now, this is the Taurus stellium that I'm talking about. There's the sun. We've got 3.5 more days until the sun enters into Gemini. The sun's pretty close to Uranus, so we can expect the unexpected literally over the next day or two, because we've only got, actually, I've cast this chart for Saturday. And the reason I cast it for Saturday was because it's put the sun and Uranus very close together. So what are we, 2 days off, which means the sun is probably about 24.5 degrees Taurus. And as it gets close to the Uranus, we would hope that there'd be some breakthroughs in some of the big issues that are happening. We could also get some unexpected surprises. We have Mercury sitting in Taurus, and, you know, Mercury in Taurus on a worldly level arrives at decisions slowly. And once those decisions or those beliefs are made, then sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Once those beliefs and decisions are made, then they're kind of set in stone, and they're hard to change. One of the things that's very strong in this chart, Katerina, just could you make sure you're muted, please? Is this square between Mars and Mercury? This is the red line that goes across there. Which says it's not a very easy week for arriving at decisions where there's conflict. Now, if you had that in your individual chart, the astrologer would probably say to you, well, don't get into arguments with people, you know, keep a cool head. Don't be too sort of fixed on one idea. Find a way of being flexible, because this Mercury-Mars square indicates a certain amount of bullheadedness and rigidity and fixity and attempt to dominate others with one's ideas. So it's not particularly good for listening to each other. Yeah, and then we have the downward pointing arrow Vulcan, which is associated esoterically with spiritual purification. And the spiritual purification of the Taurian energy is meant to clear away emotional or mental or personality conflicts to get a principled stand or a principled approach. So, of course, esoterically, that's what we're striving for, is to stand with our principles. Okay, but of course, if you look at all of this Taurus on the worldly level, what we're talking about here is the fourth ray of harmony through conflict. Now, I've just cast this chart for Moscow. I don't know why I did that, but I suppose it's because we've got lots of issues going on with Putin. It's hard to know where exactly the planets fall. Other things to talk about is the potential, and obviously from a Moscow's perspective, for this big green and blue rectangle, the mystic rectangle. And, you know, with the mystic rectangle, we can effortlessly move forward to our goals. because this chart is cast for Saturday, one would hope and pray that there would be some kind of forward movement with the issues around Ukraine and the war, not just Ukraine and the war, but specifically some sort of a breakthrough around a deadlock, because we've got the past life point that governs, large groups of people, and humanity's backed themselves. We've backed ourselves into a corner, and whether it's because of strong egos, whether it's because of power or money or control, all of those kinds of reasons. When I was staring at this chart the other day, I realised that Venus was the final dispositor. So I'll just tell you what I mean by that. And the final dispositor, astrologically, simply means that it's the planet with the greatest say. So if I start anywhere, if I start with Mars in Leo, I go, well, Leo's ruled by the sun. And I go over to the sun, and the sun is in Taurus, and Taurus is ruled by Venus. So I arrive at Venus, right? And then Venus is in Aries, which is ruled by Mars. So I go back to Mars. I've got a bit of a loop happening there. If I start with Jupiter, I go Jupiter's in Gemini, that's ruled by Mercury. Mercury's in Taurus, that's ruled by Venus. Venus is in Aries. And I should say that Venus is fairly selfish when it's placed in Aries and tends to look at everything according to how will it affect me. So it falls in its detriment position when Venus is in Aries. So there's a consolidation of all these energies that goes back to a selfish, me-focused position, which is not good. You look at Vulcan in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. We're back to Venus in Aries. We look at Chiron. It's in Aries. That's ruled by Mars. Mars is in Leo, which takes us to the Sun. The Sun's in Taurus, ruled by Venus. There we are, back at Venus again. Neptune's in Aries. We've got the same loop going on. Mars to the Sun to Venus. Let's look at Saturn. Saturn's in Pisces. Pisces is ruled by Neptune. Neptune's in Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars is in Leo. Over there to the Sun and back to Venus. So you see the pattern that's happening? Everything's falling back to this planet Venus in Aries. Pluto's in Aquarius. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. Uranus is in Taurus. There we are, back to Venus. The moon's in Capricorn. Capricorn's ruled by Saturn. Saturn's in Pisces, ruled by Neptune. Neptune's in Aries, back to Mars and back to Venus. So, and Venus has been in Aries for a little while now. And, we all have to challenge ourselves not to make decisions based on what's best for me and take a selfish, one-eyed approach and then get fixated or stuck on that approach. Anyway, there's some of the themes. Oh, the other one that I forgot to mention there was Jupiter in Gemini has been square the nodal axis. And, Jupiter in Gemini, Jupiter also doesn't function well when it's in Gemini. It's in its detriment. It's very difficult to expand. It's very difficult to see the big picture when Jupiter's in Gemini. And the nodal T-square tells us that the Jupiter means that everyone is looking at the world or their life through their own personal selfish scenario, particularly if you don't have a soul energy. And so therefore we end up back in our own little corners. And if everybody does that on a political level, well, then you don't get anywhere. Yeah, the most hopeful thing about this configuration that's happening at the moment is the fact that Uranus and the Sun will be in an exact conjunction on the weekend around the 17th, 18th of May, and we can pray that there will be some breakthrough. Okay, I'm going to leave that. That's just a few things there. I didn't tell you that the Sabian symbol for Venus in Aries is a flock of wild geese. And I don't know, is this a flock of wild geese that are flying in formation, or have they been scattered and frightened, and are they going in all kinds of different directions? But that is a symbol that's connected to what's going on at the moment. Okay. Now, I've got a great deal of time for Yanis Varoufakis when he talks about matters to do with the economy. And there's this link will take you to a video clip where he talks about why Europe will lose the trade war that's been going on with America. And I think, well, that trade war's going on with everyone, really. I've encapsulated some of the points that he makes, but I encourage you to watch the video. But Yanis talks about the fact that it's necessary to rebalance the wealth economy of the whole planet. And he talks about a world monetary accounting system that was first proposed after the Second World War. I've forgotten the name of it now. And in this particular system, the idea is that any nation who makes a surplus or a deficit is penalised, rather than only penalising the nations who run into deficit. Because he talks about the fact that if you keep penalising nations in deficit, and people who are making a surplus, countries who are making a surplus, keep getting more and more and more, this leads to imbalance. And he was talking basically about a balanced approach. And this particular theory was called the International Clearing Union, which was put forward after the Second World War. And the idea was that the money that was accumulated, these levies, were collected and they were paid to the countries in deficit. This was an American economist, I think he was, who proposed this, which sounds to me wonderful because, you know, it's a policy to do with sharing where no one gets too much and no one ends up too low. And then he talked in the video about how this money, these levies that had been collected in an account that was not the World Bank, but it was a separate account, could then be invested in places like, you know, green investments in Africa or anywhere else. And the purpose is to keep a balance or a harmony on world economy. But Yanis goes on to say that this wonderful idea was shouted down in America. I think it might have been, maybe it was when Roosevelt was in, and they simply wouldn't adopt it. And the reason the Americans wouldn't adopt it, basically, in my mind, it's because of greed. They wanted to maintain the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. Yes, and of course, this is what we see playing out at the moment, that the Americans realise that there's this problem and they're trying to bring a balance into the global trade, but at the same time as trying to bring a balance, it appears that they're trying to maintain their dominance and their control. The US is the global currency. But the problem with this is that there are so many other countries, China and Russia and the nations involved in BRICS, who are busy setting up a different scheme. And so Yanis says, well, basically, it's bound to fail, the American attempt to try and, you know, rebalance the economy in a way that leaves them as top dog. So I encourage you to look at that video because I do find it very interesting. But I'm going to continue on here, just talking about the battle. Now, esoterically, we know that we have what we refer to as the Great Battle happening on Earth, and this is the battle between light and the shadow, between the soul and the egos, and it's happening on a national level and on a cultural level, on a racial level, and on an individual level. And we have been witnessing the battle on the physical and the economic level around the tariff issue and the global trade issue. And it seems to have come down to the USA and China. Yeah. The interesting thing about it is that in the past, probably the last, I don't know, 100, 150, 200 years, well, maybe, of course it's longer, trade's been happening forever, but trade's been primarily, you know, over land or over sea, and we haven't, it's only been since the Second World War that we've had sort of the other forms of trade, and more recently we have the digital trade. But the policy that the US have is to try and isolate China, and they want to squeeze China via the enormous global tariffs. I'm not sure what they're up to with that. I mean, I think it went up to 150%, and I haven't heard anything more about it. But they also want to try and stop Chinese goods from transiting through territories that the US controls. So they want to control where and how and with whom the Chinese trade. And the purpose of this is to break or decouple all the supply chains. But of course, this is liable to backfire in their faces simply because of the technology. And, you know, like the Americans don't make things the way the Chinese make things. So the Chinese make all kinds of things, going from the chips that run the computers to the technological world, to the cars, the vehicles, whatever. So the Americans are trying to force nations to choose, deal with us or and not the Chinese, or vice versa. Whether or not, and this is a fairly strong arm kind of tactic, and we can see from that stellium, the Taurus stellium, that strong arm tactics where there's no room for negotiation simply don't work. Yanis referred to it as a global chess game. And there are so many pieces moving that it's very hard to keep track of what it's all about. But the purpose really is to disrupt the Chinese export routes and keep the dollar at the top of everything. Now, previously, the trade routes that have been around the oceans have been controlled up until probably, well, I don't know, maybe the last few decade or two, controlled by the US or controlled by the West. And there's enormous maritime bottlenecks that are going on. Now, the Red Sea is an interesting place because it's been a bit of a shortcut from the east to the west, and it has been under the British control and then the American control. More recently, there've been pirates off the African coast. Now we've got drone warfare. And of course, it's a pathway for trade and or war through to Israel. And so it's one of the hot spots that for both war and for trade. And the Suez Canal as well, right at the top of the Red Sea. I think it was 1956 when I looked it up that there was a war where Israel basically tried to take over the Suez, which had been held by the British, and also take over as much of Egypt as they could. And they ended up, I don't remember all the various wars, but they did have ownership of the Sinai at one point. And then I think there was a later war, then the Egyptians took the Sinai back. So it's a hot spot, and it has been a hot spot basically since the late 19th century. Because of trade. And, you know, China has a lot to sell and wants to be able to move freely around the oceans of the world to take its goods. Now, this picture down in the bottom right-hand corner here is how the Red Sea looked and in the 19th century, you know, and this is possibly when they opened the Suez, the date of that one. And of course, if you look at the other image, you'll see that the Red Sea, here it is here, and the Suez Canal there, is a direct trade route across if you were going over here into Asia. But the other thing to notice is that this whole region, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, this is where the big resources are, you know, the gas and the oil, Afghanistan. So it's an area that's extremely important for power, for money, and therefore political control. And so this is nothing new that we've been seeing battles going on there, but the battle as to who controls this region, it continues and it heats up week by week and month by month. There have been another bottleneck, apart from the Red Sea. The other bottleneck is the Strait of Malacca, and this is a shortcut from China going through Asia, through the Indian Ocean, and from the Pacific across to Europe. Apparently, Indonesia have primary control, but I think there's some control that's occurred, and you'll see it there as the Strait of Malacca. And of course, this is all sort of Indonesia, but Singapore's there somewhere. I'm not sure exactly. There it is, Singapore. Yeah. So everybody wants a piece of this area, and it makes it easy to understand why we have the Chinese military regularly patrolling around this area and into the South China Sea, because this is where their wealth and their money and their power goes through. And of course, this is the containers and the cargo vessels that are moving in that direction. And the Japanese would also like to have a piece of this pie. And, you know, when you look at 4 planets in Taurus, you start thinking about who controls what, you know, whether it's bank accounts or money or power. Yeah, so I've got the chart for Xi Jinping here. I don't know what time he's born, so I've cast it for Beijing. I'd never looked at his chart before, but well, just to backtrack a little bit and talk about the great battle that's going on. The great battle on Earth is for spiritual humanity to awaken, to make choices that involve care and compassion for others, to put aside selfishness. And esoterically, we see those tests, if you like, are associated with the fixed signs of the zodiac, and that's Leo. There's a bit of Leo there, and Aquarius, and Taurus, and Scorpio. So this is the battle that's happening on the planet at the moment, and it's witnessed and observed through the fixed signs. So I noticed that Xi Jinping has the moon in Leo and the South Node. However, all that indicates to me is that he's got a history on an ego and a personality level of someone who likes to be in control and operates from control. You see, Leo, when it's connected to the soul, has the second ray of the heart and love and compassion. But Leo on the first ray is to do with the personality having will and control. And then I noticed this very strong red lines here over to Taurus, which is associated with wealth and land and money and power. So that's not particularly helpful for sharing of the resources of the earth. However, there are other things in Xi Jinping's chart that I do like, and that's these fantastic 3 blue lines here that link, well, actually he's only got 2 because we don't know what time he's born, but it link his sun and Vulcan in Gemini down to 2 planets in Libra. Yeah, and this is a very fortunate placement, and it means that he has a capacity to be able to negotiate and to be flexible. So I've got one pattern of flexibility and another pattern of rigidity and power. The only other thing I'll talk about with this here is that he has a destiny point in the sign of Aquarius. And the destiny point, the North Node in the sign of Aquarius, is an invitation to sort of think broader beyond maybe his nation. And of course, I suppose all leaders tend to look at their national interest. It's a rare leader indeed who can look at the national and the international interest. I'm inclined to think, and then there's Jupiter in his chart that's well aspected, and I'm inclined to think that some of the innovative technological streets ahead in terms of what they make and the technological and the digital world is connected in part to these strong air signs. Yeah, I won't say any more about that, but I'll just continue on. So let's talk about China and Russia and the United Arab Emirates and BRICS. Now, about a month ago, 22nd of April, the UAE made a trade deal with China, and this was a fairly significant 5-year trade deal about the provision of liquid natural gas, which of course is one of the major resources that comes out of the Middle East and that China needs for its economy. Yeah, so that's a deal that's been made probably relatively soon after the tariffs were announced. Is that right? Yeah, they were announced in March, I think. And of course, the advantages of this is that it strengthens the link between China and the Gulf states. It gives them more people to play with, more suppliers, you know, China can then deal with Russia and the BRICS nations. It helps them to step out or bypass some of these exporters of where previously they've dealt and traded with the US for the liquid natural gas. It helps them to step out of the trap that's been set for them around the tariffs, and it decouples them. They don't have to talk to the US. They have other fish to fry. And so this is strategically very clever and very timely, and has literally been only there. I don't think it's come into play yet, but they've made the deal. So I don't know whether the supplies actually started, but they have other ways to go. They're not being caught in the trap that President Trump's been trying to set for China. Yeah. And of course, these allegiances and these blocks that China's making with Russia and China's making with the Middle East sends the shivers up the Western world, and particularly America, because they're used to having the ball in their court and dominating and controlling things. But in fact, China's leading the way. It's leading the global economy. It's leading on physical infrastructure. It's leading with the digital currencies, the yuan. It's leading with global trade. So they've kind of come out ahead, despite the fact that they have very, very significant issues with human rights abuse, with the prolific endemic surveillance and the locking up or the murdering of anyone who dares to speak against them. You know, so there are positives and negatives happening in China as they are happening in other nations. But this has put the wind up the West, and it's put the wind up Trump, and I think this is part of the battle that's going on. Now, I have heard about the BRICS states before, but I'd never actually looked it up until a couple of days ago, and I discovered that there were 22 member states now, as of quite recently. I think it's Algeria and Turkey and Vietnam that joined fairly recently, and I don't recall when it first started, but I think the first half a dozen, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, I think they were the foundational members. And of course, what we have here is China and Russia in a military bloc, yeah, and Iran and the UAE have resources. So this is extremely powerful and not to be disparaged or looked down upon. And it's a demonstration of collaboration. And I think esoterically, this is what we need. We need collaboration. What we don't need is one nation or one bloc, whether it's NATO or BRICS, dominating everything. You know, competition is healthy. Okay, let's continue to talk about the global trade. So I showed you those maps before of the Persian Gulf and how crucial it is because of the role that the Middle East plays in the economic, what's happening on the planet. I found this image, which I thought was particularly interesting, because there we have 2000 and a lot of it's blue, and the blue is how much of the globe that the US was dominating as the largest trading partner. Fast forward 24 years, and all of a sudden, and I mean, we know in Australia that China is our major trading partner, but I didn't know that South America was. I certainly didn't know that most of Africa was. I didn't know that Iceland was trading. Oh, it's not Iceland, beg your pardon, that's Greenland. Yeah, so if you have a look, there's a very small amount. There's just this tiny bit of Europe and America that are, you know, in lockstep around the US dollar. So there's even more evidence of why the American government are doing everything they can to bring some of the trade, some of the money, some of the power and the control back. And in order to do that, of course, they need a very, very strong presence around the Persian Gulf, because this is where the oil-rich and the gas-rich countries are. There's Iran, there's Kuwait, there's Bahrain, there's Qatar, the UAE. This is exactly where Trump's flown into this region over the last 2 or 3 days for his big Gulf tour. And he's doing it for money. And I would pray that he's doing it out of humanitarian concerns. But, you know, I look at it and I think, well, the politicians first and foremost want to keep their coffers filled and want to be in control. And these are the countries with the largest reserve, and a few of them, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, the UAE, they're at the top of the list in terms of the oil. I'm not sure about the gas. Okay, so that's the sea routes, but the other ace up the sleeve that China's been working on for the last, oh, look, it's at least 10 years that I'm aware of, and it's probably more like 15 or 20, are the different transport corridors. And the one particular corridor that's the strongest one is the International North-South Transport Corridor. And this is to basically stop some of the drama that's going on, because at the moment, the West only hold 12% of the global trade. And this is why we have all the battles going on in this region around the Persian Gulf, around the Red Sea, and particularly from Israel's perspective, they want to make sure that they're in charge here. Yeah, they want to be in charge there for politics and for trade and for all kinds of reasons. And similarly, the UAE and Qatar, and therefore China and Russia and Iran, all want control over the Persian Gulf. The problem really, as I understand it, is that Saudi Arabia has been traditionally an ally of the East, of the West, sorry, an ally of the Americans, despite the fact that this is smack bang in the middle of the Middle East. Yeah, so Saudi Arabia is very important, because if the Americans can get on side with the Saudis, and they have been, I think, for decades, but if they can maintain that, then they have some clout in the region. Okay, I found this map interesting. It's about the Silk Road coming from China, excuse me, all the way through, down through the Himalayas, in through the Middle East, and they went as far as Constantinople, Istanbul, or down to Egypt. Now, I don't know when the Silk Road was established, but you can see from the Chinese perspective that this is the shortcut, and anywhere else is the long cut, down through the South China Sea, up through the Malacca Strait, across the Indian Ocean, through the Arabian, yeah, and this way to Europe. So the Chinese don't want to take the sea route, and therefore they are building a new Silk Road. And of course, this has been something that, and this is a bit of a cartoon here, I couldn't quite pick out who's who. Clearly this is Queen Victoria. I wonder if this is Bismarck. I don't know. This looks like someone from Japan. This is the Chinese. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. Yeah, and there have been many wars fought over who owns or controls the routes. Okay, let's just go back to where's Iran in all of that. Oh, my Arabia, Iran, my geography is not that great. There it is, just to the right-hand side of the Persian Gulf. So, of course, Iran is therefore a bit of a fly in the ointment because of, you know, the possibility of them supposedly having nuclear weapons and supposedly wanting to sort of aim them at the West. And yet the West can't afford to make an enemy of Iran, because there it is right on the Persian Gulf. Yeah. Now, the Chinese alternative route says that Iran is pivotal because it's it's a hub for China to have a stopping off point to pick up all the supplies and then take them wherever else they want to go. And if China can work closely with Iran, then they're not squeezed or caught in the Malaccan Straits. They're not caught in the Red Sea or the Suez Canal. It's much more economical for them. 55% saving apparently if they go overland than around that way. So this INSTC, the International North-South transport corridor has been in the works for building, and this is basically a train line known as the New Silk Road, and it will come direct from China all the way across right into Afghanistan, into Iran, and it will basically mean they will have the sea corridors and the land corridors. So obviously, if you're Chinese and you're interested in markets and economy, this is a no-brainer. This is exactly what has to happen. But, you know, that helps me understand why the Americans are rushing over to have diplomatic talks with Iran. And on the 12th of April, they started talking to Iran. And they're saying it's because they want to sort of cool down the threat of the nuclear. But I've got to say I'm deeply suspicious. It's because they don't want to be pushed out of the economic pie that is in the middle of the Middle East. Yeah. And of course, part of the corridor goes up to Moscow. So part of the corridor goes across to China. Part of it comes all the way, when they've built it, all the way into Turkey here. Part of it will go up to Moscow. And India is a bit of a fly in the ointment because India is traditionally an ally of the West, yeah? Whereas Pakistan is with the East. It's all very complicated, really. Okay, so the Belt and Road Initiative, and this is the Chinese land route into Central Asia and ultimately into Turkey. And you see, there are many strands to it. It comes out of, now there it is, they have it coming from some of the northwest provinces of China, whereas in fact, it's coming all the way across. I think there's different names for different branches of it, yeah, all the way across, ending up in Ankara, all the way down here in Iran. This is their port, because you see Saudi Arabia is on side with the Americans. So therefore Iran has to be on side with BRICS and with China and with Russia, which is of course why the Americans are rushing over there to shake hands. So the China-Iran Railway, the BRI as they call it, the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road, 1,350 kilometre railway line. Can you imagine? Like here in Australia, there's been talk for, I don't know, decades about building a fast railway line from Melbourne to Sydney, 600 kilometres, and it's never happened. Well, this is 1,350, and I don't have a shadow of a doubt that the Chinese will do this, and they will end up with their hub for the resources where they can offload and take back to China what they need and send on from Iran, whatever it is that's been created, and export. It's an extremely pivotal area. An economic land-based corridor. There's the date that I've forgotten. 7 years they've been planning this, but it opens at the end of 2025. Yeah, that's less than a year away, less than 9 months away even. Yeah, so the Chinese are streets ahead in putting in the infrastructure so that they are completely independent and maintain their dominance on the global stage. And they don't have to go through the Straits of Malacca, and they don't have to worry about anything to do with America. Yeah, so this is all very well and good in terms of the Chinese and the Russians collaborating within their networks. But what we don't want is the two networks at war. But I don't know that from my estimation, it looks like China's winning the race. Why do they need to go to war? You know, why does Iran need to go to war? Right? So I'm a little bit suspicious that the beating of the war drum, look out, Iran's got nuclear weapons, is to the advantage of the Americans, and it's really got nothing to do with what actually is going on. But Anna says we are in the middle of a geopolitical chess game. Now, I think I probably was too busy as a young adult with my family responsibilities to sort of learn or get involved with chess, but I kind of wish I knew something about chess. Because that's what's going on at the moment. And clearly the losers are the people in the Middle East and the people in Ukraine. So we have a humanitarian catastrophe that can only be averted if the Gaza war is ended. And of course, there's two sides to every equation here. If the Gaza war's ended, it will be ended under what's referred to as the Abraham Accord, which was a meeting that happened in the, I think it might have been in the Trump first presidency in September 2020, when Israel and the Arab states signed the Abraham Accord and agreed to try and live in peace. Yeah. Now, in order to have the Abraham Accord ratified, what we need is a recognition of Palestine under the UN Charter. We need a two-state solution, yeah? And I believe we need Netanyahu to be prosecuted as a war criminal. But of course, that's not what Netanyahu wants. What Netanyahu wants is something that's referred to as the Greater Israel Project. Now, the Greater Israel Project, and I was looking this up today, I think, and I may be wrong, but I have a feeling that Donald Trump was also involved in Netanyahu's vision, his brainstorm for the Greater Israel Project, where Israel takes Syria, takes some of Iraq, goes down into Saudi Arabia, owns the Sinai, and owns Cairo and Egypt. I mean, this is just a land grab of the most, exponential proportions. And I'm pretty sure that I read somewhere that Trump was involved in that. So I don't know, is this Trump having a bet each way? Yes, the Abraham Accord's a good idea, but so's the Greater Israel Plan, and both of these issues are still on the table. Netanyahu still wants the Greater Israel, yeah, and hopefully reason will prevail and the Abraham Accord will bring Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran and the Israel into some kind of agreement. We have to wait and see. Okay. Yanis has another video, and again, I'm not going to play it, but it's basically when he talks in this video, he says the wake-up call that we've been having with what's going on in Gaza is our generation's crystal nut. And he said that if, and he hypothesizes in this talk that he gives, that if we were transported back to 38, thank you, Zachary. If we were transported back to 1938 and we saw what was happening against the Jewish people in Germany, we would stand up and rise up and stop the Nazi overflow. And we would have stopped Second World War. So Yanis is pleading, saying this is the time for our generation to stand up. And of course, on the groundswell, there's been a lot of standing up, but where it really counts, with the International Criminal Court, with the United Nations, with the leaders of the supposed democratic first world, it hasn't happened. And meanwhile, it's 2 million Gazans facing starvation. Somewhere between 65,000 and 100,000 is the death toll. I did hear on the radio this morning that the International Red Cross have finally said tut-tut to Israel. Tut-tut. It's only taken them, 2.5, 3 years? Tut-tut to Israel. And I also noticed that this weekend, right on that Sun-Uranus conjunction, the Palestinian people are organising, and I don't know whether this is just in the Middle East or whether it's a global thing, what's being referred to as the Nakba 77. And this is, they're calling for the Palestinian people to come out into the streets and say enough. And I think the 77 goes back 77 years, which would take us back to when? My math's not...
1948.
Which one?
1948.
Thank you very much, Zachary. The 1948. So this is their call to arms, yeah? Because Netanyahu's a war criminal, and the organisations that we have tasks to stop him haven't done it, yeah? So I don't know what's going to happen. Will Trump come in at the last minute on the weekend and go, okay, I'm landing in the corner of the Abraham Peace Accord? You know, it's looking a bit that way because he's been cold shouldering Netanyahu for the last week or two. Yeah. I think this link will take you to the website BDS Movement. Yeah, it looks like a newspaper, a Palestinian newspaper, a global day of action, they're calling it. Yeah. Okay, so that's extremely hopeful. And you know, like Trump loves the money. He loves to be on the world stage, but he also likes to be a winner. And maybe he would think that there he would be the man that will finally break the deadlock and bring peace. Now, if he does that, that'd be a complete backflip from what he said back in February. We'll like get rid of the Palestinians and we'll put motels there. So we have to wait and see what will happen. Now, we have looked at Netanyahu's chart some months ago. And just to remind you, I'll just see if I can find my little pointer. There it is. There's the Leo. I talked to you about the fixed signs of the zodiac, Mars in Leo. And of course, you can't really count Pluto in Leo because that's a post-war placement. But Mars is a non-sacred planet in Leo. Now, it doesn't look like it's got an enormous amount of energy in the chart. There's this sort of dotted red line that goes across, which basically 26, that's a semi-sextile across to that, looks like Mercury. Yeah. And what happens with the, not a semi-sextile, it's a semi-square. That little dotted red line is a bit like a trip line, and it's an invisible trip wire. Now, remember I said to you at the very beginning of the talk that Mercury and Mars are square at the moment, and that when Mercury and Mars are square, it's very difficult to reach agreements because you get bullheadedness happening. So Netanyahu has a bullheaded pattern that's hidden underground a tripwire. Yeah, he comes across with all this Libran energy. Yeah, you know, normally you would think someone with that amount of Libra would be open to dialogue and discussion. However, one of the keys to Netanyahu's chart is Venus in Chiron and Sagittarius. And Sagittarius, on a personal level, is deeply connected to religious wars. Yeah, so he has a personal crisis and a very strong affiliation to religious war and this hidden energy of I will not negotiate. And in hindsight, of course, we can say, well, his Mars and Pluto, the non-sacred planets, are in the house of international justice. And I pray that he is taken to the International Criminal Court. I did have a look at some of the lunar returns that he's having in the next couple of months, and it occurred to me that possibly after the 27th of August, some of the justice that he deserves for the genocide may start to come into effect. I really hope so. I really, really hope so. Okay, I'm going to continue on there.
Can I just ask a question, and it's not a very rational sort of question, but you talk about Netanyahu as a war criminal, and I certainly don't disagree with that. He's obviously just trying to virtually achieve genocide by starving the people in Gaza.
Yes.
I've been reading, unrelated, but I've been reading a book on the bombing of Hiroshima now and Nagasaki. Now, they were two cities basically of just ordinary citizens. And that, you know, the rationale was supposedly to bring an end to the war, which it obviously did, and save a lot of lives in the future. But could it not be argued that, in fact, you know, America, Eisenhower, essentially in a form, may have actually been a war criminal, just killing so many defenseless citizens.
Yeah,
You mean Harry Truman?
Yeah.
Truman, I'm
Truman.
sorry.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
Yeah, I can hear what you're
it
saying.
achieved a similar end of just death
Mm,
of citizens, ordinary citizens.
Take a look at Harry Truman's horoscope. Sun in Taurus, Moon in Scorpio.
yeah.
Wondered whether there were similarities there.
Yeah. I suppose I can hear exactly what you're saying. Does the end justify the means?
Yeah.
And I think what I would say is that the ends never justify the means, and there will always be a karmic price to pay.
Yeah.
So a karmic price to pay would have landed on the Allies and the leaders of the Allies, and this will be Churchill and this will be Truman. Yeah. Yeah. So I can hear what you're saying, and it's very true. It's very true. I suppose,
I mean,
it
was horrific, and of course everyone criticizes Hitler for what he did to the Jews, but that was a similar thing, just a different process.
Yes.
It's a little bit different. In my opinion, it's a bit different.
Yeah.
Because Hitler persecuted the Jews through threat for an ethnic cleansing regime, through Aryan superiority beliefs, whereas Truman, or the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima to end the war, very different.
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose it's far too complicated for us to really understand when it comes to the decisions that weigh for national karma, because that's what we're talking about here. And effectively, humanity is trying to resolve some of the leftover karma from the Second World War, to say nothing of the centuries before it. Yeah. And I suppose this is why we have the Board of Karma, because these weighty matters are really their call. And I imagine that it's impossible for us to understand the breadth and the depth of everything.
Stack, I do agree with you what you were saying about ethnic cleansing, but I'm old enough to remember how Westerners viewed the Japanese. There was a racist element also to them. They were considered to be an inferior race of people.
You're right. You're totally right in that. That attitude is shocking. It's really negative, and it's for people on the spiritual path, it's something they should not get sucked into. So you're right. You're certainly right about that.
Yep.
Anyway, just a comment.
Thank you very much. Yes.
And I'll just say, in Asia, there was always, even like, the Japanese felt superior over the other Sino, like the Chinese, or, so even within, let's say, the same similar culture, there's always that. There's always someone who wants to oppress, to feel superior.
And what you're talking about there, B, thanks for that, is really, we've got the cultural karma, the religious karma, the political karma, the national karma. It's extremely complicated, isn't it? Yeah. And we can look at it, but how to know who's right and who's wrong, and that's what I come back to. Well, this is a matter for the Board of Karma. This is sort of, I can look at it, but I really have couldn't possibly have the depth or the breadth of insight. But I suppose for me as an astrologer, this Chiron and Venus sitting on the ascendant, on the fixed star Antares, and I've talked about that before, means that the test, one of the major tests for breakthrough or breakdown for Netanyahu, is how he deals with religious war. And we have religious war for centuries. I shall continue, though. Okay. So in Ukraine, we're currently at an impasse. That much is obvious. We've been trying to get a negotiated end to the war. Something's going on here with my slideshow. Won't worry about that. Now, that's a map of Ukraine as it is. And I was talking before about how the I think it was Catherine the Great, and maybe she was in the 17th century, and she came down from Russia, down, and she established the port of Odessa. Yeah, and of course, when the USSR was before the fall of the USSR, Belarus was part of Russia, parts of Poland, whatever these countries are here, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, yeah, and of course Ukraine. So part of Putin's rationale is that he wants to take Kiev. He wants to take from the Dnieper, I think this is the Dnieper River. I'm not sure if it goes that way, but he definitely wants the port of Odessa. And clearly the Europeans haven't got an army to fight him. The Americans don't want to throw in any more money. So they say, we shall see, any more troops or money. They basically want to do deals for the resources. I think the only one that's got an army is Poland. They haven't got a hope in hell. So it's very difficult to see how, unless NATO comes to the table and begins negotiating with, if Zelensky won't come to the negotiating table with Putin, then Putin will just run on over Ukraine, and he will reclaim, I would say, from Odessa up this to the west of Kiev, all the way to the Belarus border, and this will all become Russia again. I think that's probably...
I have to disagree. I'm sorry. He does not want Kiev.
He doesn't
will not
want
take Kiev. No, absolutely not.
Tell us why, please, Zachary.
He won't take Kiev because he knows that if he does, he would show the world that the invasion of February 2022 was all about aggression and territory acquisition. He wants, and in my opinion, quite rightly, the eastern provinces of Ukraine to be under Russian control, because most of them, the population is mostly Russian speaking, and they have been persecuted by Ukrainian speakers based in Kiev. And that's why the invasion happened in February of 2022. Now, NATO has basically been trying to back Russia into a corner for decades. And they've succeeded in doing a pretty good job at that. But when you want to take on when you want to take on Russia with that collective memory of what those 27 million deaths during World War II, I think that's problematic. That's quite problematic.
Thanks for that, Zach. That'll be very interesting. So what do you think about Odessa? Do you think he's going to want to go back to take Odessa as well, or you think he'll just...
I don't know. I don't have an opinion. I don't think he wants to go that far west in Ukraine.
Yep.
I think he just wants the eastern provinces, and then he's ready, up to maybe Kharkiv. You see Kharkiv there in the east, just right above. Well, anyway, it's I think so. I haven't heard any mention of Russia taking Kiev or Russia taking Odessa in the alternative press. The mainstream media might want to be broadcast that stuff, but to me it doesn't hold any water.
All right. I would have thought that it would be crucial for the Russians that they would want a port. They want a Black Sea.
Well, they've got the port. They've got Crimea.
Yeah.
They have Crimea.
Yep.
That's part of Russia, actually. So that map is not correct.
No, this is an old one. Yeah. Yep.
The Russians got Crimea. They've got their port in the Black Sea, so they don't really need Odessa.
Okay. Well, that's me not knowing enough about who's got what.
Look, it's complex.
Thank you very much for that.
It's very complex, that the politics in that area, and yes. It's interesting to hear President Putin interviewed. He goes back to the 9th and 10th, 11th centuries sometimes, and he talks about the history. And I'm going, wow, this guy really knows his history, but it's a history that very few people in the West are aware of.
Yeah. So
it's old. It's old. There's a lot of karma there. A lot of karma. Uh-huh. And I'll mention something esoteric. I've heard that, I don't know where it's from, but I heard that one of the centers of evil is based in Ukraine.
Yeah, I have heard.
I don't know where, but that's what I heard, so.
Yeah. I'm just watching the time here, and I think I better continue.
Okay.
Let's continue. This is what was supposed to be the ceasefire talks today, And I think Putin said he wasn't going, but he was sending his team. Now, when I cast this chart, I looked at it and I thought, what a mess. What a mess. And I'm not going to talk a great deal about it, but anyone looking at that chart, you don't have to know anything about astrology to know that it looks extremely chaotic. Yeah. The thing that dominates is the big red square, which says
big red square. That's good. I like that.
The big red square. It's a movable feast. Just you think you know what's happening and then it changes. You think you know who you're going to talk to and then they're not coming to the meeting. It's a movable feast and has been a movable feast ever since it was, I think it was Putin who said, I'll meet you on Thursday. Yeah. And there's been this backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. The planet Venus, and I was talking before about how everything comes back to the planet in detriment, the me and my, and what's good for me. And I looked up the Sabian symbol for that, and it says the president of the country. And I thought, well, how very interesting. You know, I don't know whether Zelensky's gone to the meeting today. Putin certainly wasn't going, but clearly it's something about I'm the president, and it's possible that if Zelensky loses the battle with Russia, he will lose the presidency. He'll be gone because he's operating under martial law. So maybe that's a reason why he wouldn't want to go, because it seems very hard to imagine that Ukraine can win given what's happening. Okay. I've just done another couple of charts here. I put Putin and Zelensky's charts together. Again, and this is what we call a composite chart. I put the two of them together, I divided by 2, and I cast the chart for Istanbul. This is when I thought that Putin was going to be there meeting. And again, there's a almost, but not quite, a big red square in the mutable signs that says it's a changeable, movable feast. Just when you think you know something for certain, everything changes. And then on top of and I must have cast it for probably midday or no, 10 in the morning or something, Neptune's up the top. So the obvious purpose of the meeting is completely obscured and very hard to see what's really happening. And then I started looking at the transits, and I haven't got them on here, but I did notice, and I'll just, if you could imagine the transiting south nodes, like it's sitting here in Virgo, a little red dot, and it's when it gets to the planet Uranus, and that will be in October this year. I think if there's going to be a breakthrough around this deadlock between the two of them, Putin and Zelensky, then maybe it'll be October, but it's very hard, I find, to see that it's happening now. Okay, I'm going to leave that chart and continue on. I told you before about the fact that we're in the great battle and it's all happening around money and war and the war games. We've talked about the Axis, and I don't really like to use that term because it kind of throws us back to a Second World War mentality where we have one side pitted against the other. I would hope that the two sides can begin dialogue and talk. But the Russians, the Indians, the Chinese, and of course BRICS, they have up their sleeve the international corridor, the big 1,350 kilometre train line. But they're also actively involved in building up the military and evading the sanctions, you know, and it's a drone warfare that's happening. The Russians have these Su-35s, what they call the super flankers. Super flankers, a strange name, isn't it? And of course, I think Israel just in the last week has been bombing the hell out of Hamas and trying to do everything they can to annihilate, because clearly I think Netanyahu can see that he's been cold-shouldered by Trump. So he's kind of hell-bent on pursuing even more war. Meanwhile, the uprising, not just in Palestine, but all over the world, people standing for the Palestinians and for the Gazans is happening. So the way I look at it is that the Middle East and the issues that are going on there, it's a bidding war, and who's bidding the highest? And you know, I did watch the video of Trump arriving in Saudi Arabia and meeting the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and then he's flown on and he's met the president-elect. I don't know what you call him, the president that they have, the temporary president in Syria, Ahmad al-Shahara, and there's deals being done, and we're not being told what's happening. You know, we're not being told what's happening to do with money and power and control and who's giving what and who's trading what. But Trump's been boasting that it's trillion-dollar deals, and he likes to make a deal, and he wants to come back home to America and say, well, this is the deal that I did, and aren't I the fantastic guy? And you know, the guy on the left, the Crown Prince, is one of the wealthiest people on the planet, you know. So there's big money and big stakes going on. And the president of Syria, well, he has an extremely checkered career. He spent years in jail, in American jails, because of his affiliation with all kinds of people. Yeah, so it's I find it very, very strange to see him all of a sudden in the camp of the mates or the friends of America. And I think it was just today or yesterday that the Americans said, okay, we're lifting the sanctions. And that's one of the steps that's needed in order for this Abraham Peace Accord to go forward. So I would hope that somehow or other, in the middle of all this wheeling and dealing and money and power and photo ops, that there's some peace accord that comes through, but I haven't heard of it happening yet. Oh, that's silly. I've put myself up there. I'll have to hide me, I think. Hopefully, as I've put the chart up in the corner. I did, and I won't talk much about the charts because we're definitely running out of time here, but I just wanted to remind you, when you look at Donald Trump's chart of the Leo, Mars on the ascendant, and the best of Mars on the Leo ascendant is that the soul comes through and clears obstacles from the heart chakra. Remember that the obstacles are associated with sex, power, and money, and that what we're meant to do if we want spiritual growth is to not have any expectations that we will gain something. Yeah, selflessness. So the test for Donald Trump is, can he act selflessly? He has these other fantastic connections between Libra and Gemini in his chart, you know, and he's certainly got the gift of the gab. The difficulty in Trump's chart is that all of that Gemini, he tends to take one side and then he takes another side, and then he takes that side and then he takes another side. I had a brief look at the chart for the leader from Syria, and I realized that he was born in Saudi Arabia, but that he grew up in Syria, and that he's a Scorpio. So I think, okay, there he is on the world stage with a whole lot of Scorpio. Oh, he's got a lot of Sagittarius, a bit like Netanyahu, which is to do with the religious war. And he's maybe those planets in Sagittarius would actually fall in his 12th house of prison, because he's spent 6 or 7 years in prison because of being involved in jihad. Yeah, he doesn't have any planets in Taurus, but he has a crisis around Taurus. He has no money, this bloke. He's got a crisis around land and money, and a need to learn some lessons around land and money. He doesn't have any Leo or Aquarius, but a lot of Scorpio, a lot of Scorpio.
But don't forget the Libra stellium, the Libra conjunction, actually.
Yes, no, he does have good Libra, yeah, and part of the Libra is certainly got nice connections across. So he probably had fantastic networks, and I think he was working in the shadows and what the West would say on the wrong side of the war in Syria, or wars before that, and he was called a jihadist, but then he decided to come more mainstream and to fight for the national rights of Syria. I don't know a great deal about him, but
you know, if I can just throw in my personal reaction to this guy.
Please.
Every time I've seen him, Ahmad al-Shahara, every time I've seen him on television, I get a good energy from him. That's just my personal experience.
Okay. Well, I haven't watched him
that
at
sort of
all.
convinced me, either I'm totally, totally at sea and I can't read energy signatures anymore, or the guy's actually doing something positive. So he gets my support from what I see.
Well, what we do know is that when there's the fixed sign strong, there's an opportunity for breakthrough for the soul. And, who knows whether he will end up being there for his people. Yeah, but certainly he was involved with this Mars Neptune. He was jailed for planting bombs and killing people, and his name's linked to all kinds of death and destruction in the past. But
that's true.
we know.
That's true. But
yeah.
I think he's a changed man. That's my.
Yeah. Well, someone to watch anyway. Okay. Let me see what else that I want to talk about. Have I missed a thing there? No. What I wanted to say is that, in my opinion, if humanity cannot sort this out, Ukraine and the Middle East and generally this sort of war and power and money and greed, then the earth will sort it out. And I've been watching the earthquakes around the Middle East, just literally in the last, well, you can see there, it's a Santorini, 13,000, that's miniature quakes, tiny, tiny, tiny ones all around Santorini, and that's the Eastern Mediterranean. Yeah. And then 23rd of April, that was the big one. That was actually in the Sea of Marmara, just off the coast of Istanbul. Yeah. And then yesterday in the Mediterranean, and I think I'm confused as to whether there was one or more than one quake, because sometimes it's recorded as a 5.9, then I saw it recorded as a 6.1, then I saw it recorded as a 6.2, and then I saw it recorded as a 6.4. But I've seen that it was actually felt in many places in Israel. It was felt in Alexandria and Cairo, and it was felt in Greece. And I look at that and I think, this is the earth. This is what Zachary would say, the African roll. This is the tectonic energy, building, 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 as the political stuff is building and building. Yes. Anyway, we do have so many things that we can look at, and I think that's probably the end of the slideshow, except to tell you that I've got lots of links. So I posted this late this afternoon up onto the website, and I think in the PDF you can touch the links and it will take you to the various talks. Will Trump dump Netanyahu? Professor Sachs talking about Israel. There's Giannis talking about our generation's Kristallnacht, the golf tour that's been happening the last couple of days. And of course, the various recordings, and where have I got it? Yeah, the YouTubes, yeah. Yes, I think that's all I had to say. And so I might just thank you all for your attention, and I will stop this recording.